My family kicked me out of our group chat after I'd secretly paid their bills for 5 years. My response was simple: understood. Then, I shut down the fund. 89 missed calls later, they finally realized I wasn't just their son. Was the only thing standing between them and total financial ruin. My world operates on calculated risk. From my office on the 47th floor, overlooking the Chicago River, my entire life is about measuring uncertainty. I develop models to foresee supply chain disruptions. I create plans to lessen regulatory fallout. I even analyze national debt stability for fun. As a risk and compliance officer, my job is to spot the iceberg long before the ship gets close to. Tell multi-billion-dollar companies how to avoid disasters they can't yet see. I'm well paid to be extremely careful. My life is about order, rules, and predictable outcomes, which is deeply ironic, because my personal life was a total mess. I've refused to face for years. It's Tuesday. I'm deep into a risk assessment for a new project in Southeast Asia, tracking the complicated connections between political instability and currency changes. My phone vibrates with a familiar, unwelcome buzz. It's not a call, which I could ignore, but a text. Texts stick around. This one's from my mother, Marion. The message isn't a request. It's a statement, an assumption that my money is just another item in the family budget. Silas, Griffin's car insurance is due tomorrow. He's a bit short. Can you handle it? No, please. No, if you can. It's just the casual expectation that I'd of course take care of it. Griffin, my older brother by 3 years, was always a bit short. He was a constant experiment in failed business ideas and life philosophies, each one more expensive than the last. I don't text back. I just let out a long, tired sigh that feels like it's coming from a decade's worth of exhaustion. I unlock my phone, open the banking app, and go to the bill pay section. G. Miller Auto Insurance. $3,145.50. I approve the payment. A small, plain confirmation screen pops up. Handled. I try to get back to the Indonesian rupiah, but my focus is gone. The neat, controllable world on my screen feels like a lie compared to the messy, unpredictable risks of my own family. Later, at lunch, my friend and colleague Theo notices my mood. We're at a small sandwich shop, the loud chatter a world away from our quiet office. "You've got your Griffin face on," he says, not unkindly, before biting into his Reuben. I push my food around my plate. His car insurance was due. Theo chews for a moment, then swallows. Another Griffin tax, huh? You know, you're a professional risk officer. What's the biggest unchecked risk in your personal life right now? I'll give you a hint. It's not the bond market. It's complicated, I mumble. The same tired excuse I always used.
He's
my brother. No, he's your 35-year-old dependent, Theo counters, his voice softening slightly. Look, man, I get it. But there's a difference between helping and enabling. You're just paying a premium for peace. A premium for peace. The phrase stuck with me all afternoon. He was right. It's exactly what it was. I was paying a subscription fee to avoid the drama. The guilt-tripping calls from my mother, the accusations from my father about not caring. I was paying to maintain a fragile, conditional version of family harmony. It reminded me of being a kid. Griffin would score the winning touchdown and be carried off the field on my dad's shoulders. A week later, I'd win the state science. Fair and get a quiet, "That's nice, dear," from my mom before she'd ask me to help Griffin with his homework. His value was his charm, his flash. My value had always been my quiet usefulness, and I've been paying for it ever since. 5 years. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago. Other times it feels like yesterday. That was the year it all truly began. The year I went from being the helpful younger brother to the family's designated financial problem solver. I was 27 and on the verge of what felt like real adulthood. I'd just been promoted from a junior analyst to a full one. And after years of careful saving, I'd finally saved enough for a down payment on a 1-bedroom condo in Lincoln Park. It was my dream. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of the park, a space that was entirely, undeniably mine. I had the pre-approval letter from the bank. The realtor was ready. I was scheduled to sign the initial papers on Friday. The call came on a Wednesday, just after midnight. I was asleep, and the shrill ring of the phone jolted me awake. It was my father, Walter, and his voice was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. Ragged, terrified whisper. "Silas, son, are you awake? It's Griffin." My blood ran cold. "What happened? Is he okay?" "Geez, he's in trouble. Real trouble." My dad took a shaky breath, and I could hear my mom sobbing in the background. His new business idea, the online trading thing, it went bad. He didn't just lose his money. He lost someone else's. I sat up in bed, the dream of my condo already starting to feel blurry and distant. "What do you mean someone else's?" "A private lender," my dad said, the words heavy with shame. "Not a bank. He owes them $30,000, and they want it by Friday. Or they said they're going to hurt him." He broke down then, a full, gulping sob from a man I'd never seen cry. "They're going to break his legs, Silas. I can't. We don't have it. We mortgaged the house years ago for his last venture. You're his only hope. His only hope." The words echoed in the dark of my apartment. I thought of my savings account, the neat sum of $32,000 sitting there, waiting for my new life. It was a choice, but it didn't feel like one.
Ow.
I buy a home, or do I save my brother from a beating, or worse? My family had framed it so there was only one possible answer. The next day, I walked into my bank in a daze. I remember the teller, a kind-looking woman with graying hair, giving me a concerned look as I asked to withdraw nearly the entire balance in cash. "Is everything all right, sir?" she asked softly. "Everything's fine," I lied, my voice hollow. "Just a family investment." I walked out with a thick manila envelope that felt as heavy as a tombstone. I drove to my parents' house and handed it to my father. He hugged me, his shoulders trembling with relief. My mother kissed my cheek, her tears wet against my skin. "Thank you, Silas," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We knew we could depend on you. You're the responsible one. You'll always save us." I drove back to my small rented apartment that night and called the realtor to cancel the signing. As I hung up, my mother's words replayed in my head. Dependable. Responsible. They weren't meant as a burden. They were meant as the highest compliment my family could give. But sitting there in the ruins of my own dream, I had a chilling thought. This wasn't a rescue. This was the moment they dropped their anchor, and its chain was wrapped squarely around my neck. It was the first payment on a debt I would soon learn could never be repaid. After the $30,000 bailout, there was a brief good period. Griffin was sorry. My parents were endlessly grateful. There were promises of him getting a real job, of things being different now. But patterns, like rivers, tend to follow the path of least resistance. And I had just made myself the path of least resistance. The one-time crisis soon broke into 1,000 smaller, more manageable emergencies, death by 1,000 financial cuts. It was sneaky. It started small. Text from Griffin. "Hey man, my phone bill is overdue. Can you spot me $150? I'll get you back next week." He never did. A call from my mom. "Your father's car needs new brakes, and he's too proud to ask you himself. I'd pay the mechanic directly." It was always framed as a loan, a spot, a temporary fix. But the money only ever flowed one way. Then came the bigger projects. Griffin decided he was going to be a web developer and needed $5,000 for an intense coding boot camp. He quit after 3 weeks because the instructor didn't respect his creative process. The $5,000 disappeared. Then, my mom, stressed from all the drama, ran up a few thousand on her credit cards with retail therapy. I paid it off to stop the interest from building up. The real turning point, the moment my frustration began to turn into something colder and more calculating, happened about 2 years in. I had invited my family over for dinner at my apartment. I had just gotten a significant raise and was feeling good, thinking maybe I could finally start rebuilding my savings. As we ate, they started talking about a vacation. "You know," my mother said, looking around my apartment with a critical eye, "we haven't had a real family vacation in years. It would do your brother so much good to get away." My dad, Walter, nodded in agreement. "A week in Florida, maybe? Get some sun, and Griffin chimed in, with a casual, shocking sense of entitlement that had become his trademark. Yeah, man. And with that fat raise he just got, we could probably afford that nicer resort right on the beach. You deserve to treat us. I just stared at him, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth. He wasn't joking. They were all looking at me expectantly. My raise wasn't my achievement. It was their new slush fund. My success wasn't for me. It was for them. I didn't say anything. I just mumbled something about having to check my finances and changed the subject. But that night after they left, something in me snapped. Not loudly, but with a quiet final crack of overstressed ice. I was sitting at my desk, the silence of my apartment feeling more like an empty space than a comfort. I opened my laptop, not to my personal budget spreadsheet, but to a new, blank one. I named the file the ledger. Fueled by a cold, methodical anger, I started documenting everything. I went back through 5 years of bank statements, credit card bills, and text messages. Every transfer to Griffin, every bill paid for my parents, every loan that was never repaid, the coding boot camp, the credit card bailout, the car repairs, the vet bills for their dog. The numbers climbed at an alarming rate. I wasn't crying. I wasn't emotional at all. My professional instincts, the ones I used every day at work, had taken over. I was no longer a son or a brother in that moment. I was a risk officer, finally turning his analytical gaze inward. I was gathering data on a higher-risk, non-performing asset, my own family. And for the first time, I was beginning to understand the true, terrifying scope of my vulnerability. The next couple of years were a blur of the same. The ledger grew. Longer, a secret record of my shrinking finances and my sanity. I cut back on my own lifestyle in ways no one noticed. I stopped taking vacations, ate cheap meals, and put off buying a new car. I was a high-earning professional, living like a broke college student, all to keep my family's leaky ship afloat. Then something genuinely good happened, something that was supposed to be a turning point. After years of hard work, of late nights, and weekend work, I was offered a huge promotion, Director of Risk and Compliance for the entire North American division. It was a massive jump in responsibility, prestige, and most importantly, pay. It was the culmination of everything I had worked for the biggest professional achievement of my life. I remember walking out of my boss's office feeling a sense of pride I hadn't felt in years. This was mine. I had earned this. For a moment, the weight of the ledger of Griffin and my parents' endless needs seemed to lift. That evening, during our weekly family video chat, I couldn't wait to tell them. I dialed in, and their 3 faces popped up in their familiar little rectangles on my screen. Mom and Dad on the couch, Griffin in his perpetually messy bedroom. Hey everyone, I started, a genuine smile on my face for the first time in what? It felt like forever. I have some incredible news. I was just named director at my firm. My mom's face lit up for a second. Oh, Silas, that's wonderful. But before she could say more, my father leaned into the camera, his expression already clouded with his usual worry. That's fantastic, son. Really? That's great, he said, his tone dismissive, like he was acknowledging a pleasantry before getting to the real business. But listen, we need to talk about Griffin, his latest business partner, that guy from the wellness retreat. He backed out, took all the seed money. Griffin's devastated. He's talking about feeling hopeless again. And you know what happens? When he feels hopeless, I just stared at the screen, my smile faltering and then collapsing entirely. It was as if I hadn't spoken. My career-defining achievement was nothing more than a speed bump on the highway of Griffin's latest drama. The pride I'd felt just hours before evaporated, replaced by a profound, chilling clarity. No. My success would never be a cause for celebration for them. It was simply a replenishment of the resources they intended to drain. A coldness I hadn't known I possessed washed over me. The people-pleaser in me, the son, desperate for approval, finally died in that moment. Like a look directly into the camera, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. Maybe I said slowly, emphasizing each word, Griffin needs to learn to stand on his own 2 feet. The reaction was instantaneous. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest as if I'd struck her. My father's face hardened with offense. Griffin just stared, his look of practiced victimhood momentarily replaced by pure shock. An icy, heavy silence filled the call. It was the silence of a line being drawn, a boundary being enforced for the first time ever. And it was the silence that sealed my fate. I didn't know it then, but I had just committed the one unforgivable sin in my family. I had said no. The 2 days following the disastrous video call were eerily quiet. No texts, no calls. A cold, punishing silence designed to make me feel the chill of their disapproval. To make me crawl back with an apology and an open wallet. In the past, it would have worked. I would have been riddled with guilt, convincing myself I had been too harsh. But this time was different. The silence didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a break. I spent those 2 days in a strange, calm, focusing on my work, enjoying the quiet of my apartment. I felt the gears of my own life beginning to turn again, free from the constant grinding of their needs. The hammer fell on a Thursday evening. I was in my kitchen reheating some leftover pasta, the official promotion letter from my company sitting on the counter, a tangible symbol of a life I had built for myself. My phone buzzed on the granite beside it. It was the family group chat. My stomach tightened, a conditioned response to years of digital ambushes. The message was from my mother, Marion, but I knew the words were a group decision. After a lot of discussion, we feel it's best for everyone if you take a step back for a while. Griffin is in a fragile state and needs to be surrounded by positivity, not judgment. I read the words twice. Take a step back. Fragile state. Positivity, not judgment. It was a masterpiece in passive-aggressive corporate speak, weaponized to sound like they were doing me a favor. They weren't kicking me out. They were giving me space. They weren't silencing my concerns. They were protecting their fragile 35-year-old son from the judgment of being told to get a job. And then, like a punch to the gut, the confirmation appeared beneath the message, a single blue thumbs-up emoji from my Aunt Janine, the self-appointed matriarch and chief instigator. No words, no call, just a digital gesture of smug agreement. That little thumb felt more insulting than 1,000 angry words. I stood there in the quiet of my kitchen, the smell of garlic and basil filling the air, and I looked from the phone. In my hand to the promotion letter on the counter, one represented a black hole of obligation. The other represented a future. In that moment, the choice became blindingly clear. Our fingers moved over the screen, my movements steady and deliberate. All the years of resentment, all the quiet sacrifices, all the entries in the ledger coalesced into a single cold point of action. I typed back a reply to the group. Understood. I will respect your decision. As such, I will also be stepping away from all financial support, effective immediately. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't care to see the shocked emoji faces or the frantic typing bubbles. I put the phone down, walked over to my laptop, and opened my banking portal. My hands didn't shake. I canceled every recurring payment to their accounts. The auto transfer to Griffin, the utility bill payments for my parents. Then I went to the account named Family Fund, the joint account I had opened and funded solely for 5 years as a catch-all for their emergencies. I clicked through the menus. Close account. Confirmation window popped up. Are you sure? This action is permanent. Slow smile spread across my face. I'm sure, I whispered to the empty room. I clicked the button. I went to bed that night feeling lighter than I had in years. And then, at exactly 3:11 a.m., my phone, silent on the nightstand, began to buzz and buzz and buzz. A frantic, incessant vibration that signaled the sound of a world breaking. My world wasn't breaking. Theirs was. I didn't answer the phone. I let it vibrate itself into a frenzy on my nightstand, a furious digital moth beating itself too. Death against the glass. Against the screen light up with their names, one after another. Mom, Dad, Griffin. Mom again, Dad. A blocked number, which was probably Griffin trying a new tactic, went on for hours. When my alarm went off at 6:30 a.m., I picked up the phone. 89 missed calls, a wall of frantic texts. I didn't read them. I just glanced at the last notification, a voicemail from Dad. I took a deep breath and played it. It was a sound I barely recognized. The usual confident bluster was gone, replaced by a high-pitched panic, laced with pure rage. "Silas, what did you do? What the hell did you do?" "The mortgage payment bounced. The bank just called me," they said. "The payment was rejected. They're talking about penalty fees, your mother's prescription. The pharmacy called me. Call me right now." The voicemail ended with a strangled, angry sound. I felt a tremor of the old guilt, the conditioned response to his anger.
Why, but...
Then I looked at the cold, hard screen of my phone. I thought of the step-away message. I thought of Aunt Janine's smug thumbs up. I went to my last text exchange with my father, the one where he had been part of the group chat exiling me. I typed a single sentence and hit send. As requested, I have stepped away. Then I did the same for my mother. Her texts were a cascade of confusion and hysteria. Silas. My credit card was declined at the grocery store, in front of everyone. The cashier looked at me like I was a criminal. "What is happening? Please answer me." I screenshotted her original message to me from the group chat and sent it back to her, followed by the same 6 words. As requested, I have stepped away. Then came Griffin. His texts were full of insults. "You son of a B, asterisk, 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 asterisk. You think you're so much better than us? You're trying to ruin me?" I didn't even bother with a response. I just blocked his number. I got ready for work in a state of surreal calm. It was like I was watching a movie of someone else's life. The man in the mirror tying his tie looked like me, but he felt different. He felt solid, untouchable. At my desk, I put my phone on. Silent and face down, but I could feel its phantom vibrations, a constant hum of their world collapsing. Around noon, I allowed myself a glance. A new voicemail from my mom. I played it, holding the phone to my ear. Her voice was no longer hysterical. It was low, pleading, and filled with a bewildered sense of betrayal that was almost laughable in its hypocrisy. "Silas, I don't understand," she whimpered. "You've always taken care of everything. You're the responsible one. Why would you do this to us? We're your family." That was the line that did it. Why would you do this to us? As if I were the aggressor, as if I had fired the first shot. As if their years of entitlement and exploitation were just a natural state of being, and my refusal to participate was a declaration of war. I felt a wave of icy calm wash over me. As a risk officer, my job was to perform stress tests on systems to see where they fail. I had just inadvertently run a stress test on my family. And the system hadn't just failed, it had completely fallen apart at the first sign of pressure, revealing that the entire structure had been built on a single faulty foundation: me. This wasn't just about the money anymore. This was about reality. And they were about to get a harsh lesson. The next few days were a masterclass in chaotic desperation. They tried everything. Aunt Janine sent me a self-righteous email about the importance of forgiveness. I deleted it without reading. They sent my cousin Emily as a scout, who called me asking if I was okay, and casually mentioned how worried everyone was. I told her I was better than ever and ended the call. Finally, they used their last resort, a mandatory family intervention via Zoom, organized by Janine, of course. The email invitation read, "Time to talk and heal." I knew it was an ambush, but I also knew it was necessary. This was the final confrontation, the last battle in a war I hadn't even realized I was fighting until a week ago. I clicked the link at the appointed time. Their faces popped up in a neat grid, a digital court. My parents sat together on their couch, their faces grim masks of disappointment. Griffin was in his room, his expression a carefully rehearsed portrait of a wounded victim. And Janine was there, wearing a silk scarf, looking like a judge ready to pass sentence. Griffin fired the first shot, his voice trembling with exaggerated emotion. "How could you just abandon us? After everything I've been through?" The old Silas would have flinched. The old Silas would have felt a pang of guilt, but the new Silas just felt a cold, sharp anger. "After everything you've been through?" I said, my voice dangerously quiet. You mean after everything I've paid for? The gambling debts, the failed startups, the coding boot camp you quit? Which everything are we talking about, Griffin? I need you to be specific, Griffin stammered, his victim act crumbling at the first sign of resistance. My father jumped in, his voice booming with parental authority. That's enough. You didn't have to be so destructive, Silas. We trusted you with that family fund. No, I corrected him, leaning into my camera. You didn't trust me. You used me. My name was on that account, but it was my money, my contributions, my management. It wasn't a family fund. It was a leash, and I've unclipped it. You're being cruel, my mother whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Cruel? I laughed. A short, sharp, humorless sound. You want to talk about cruel, or do you want to talk about facts? Because I'm a man. Who deals in facts? Let's look at some. And with that, I clicked share screen. A collective gasp went through the call as the ledger filled their screens. It was no longer a secret document of my resentment. It was a weapon. Rows and rows of clinical, undeniable data. Dates, pay amounts, descriptions. March 12th, 2020. Payment to Bellagio Hotel and Casino, Las Vegas. $4,500. Griffin's misunderstanding with lenders. July 22nd, 2021. Transfer to Marion Miller, $2,850. Stress-related credit card debt. January 15th, 2023. Payment to Code Wizards Academy, $5,000. Griffin's abandoned career path. Rent, utilities, car payments, insurance. It was all there. 5 years of my life, quantified in dollars and cents. I let them stare at it in stunned silence for a full minute. I could see my mother's hand covering her mouth. My father had gone pale. Any smug expression had been wiped clean off Janine's face. Then I clicked to the final tab, the one with the grand total highlighted in a bold, blood-red font. You want to see the final accounting? I asked the silent screen. Let's audit the family books. The number glowed on their screens. An accusation. In itself, total, $87,421.13. Dead silence. The only sound was Griffin's sharp intake of breath. You've been keeping tabs on us? My mother said, her voice filled with horrified disbelief. No, I said, my voice as cold and hard as the numbers on the screen. I've been surviving you. I closed the spreadsheet, the screen returning to our 4 frozen faces. The fund is closed. The support has ended. You wanted me to step away. This is what that looks like. Griffin finally found his voice, a childish shriek of rage. This isn't fair. You're just bitter because you were never the favorite. You're right, I said calmly. And the admission seemed to stun them more than the spreadsheet had. I'm not the favorite. I was the foundation, and you just found out what happens when the foundation develops a will of its own. Before anyone could respond, I moved my mouse and clicked Leave Meeting. The screen went blank, and I was left alone in the quiet of my office, my heart pounding, but my hands, for the first time, perfectly still. The Zoom call was followed by a week of profound silence. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, the kind that follows a massive explosion. I expected more begging, more accusations, but there was nothing. A part of me, the naive part I thought was long dead, wondered if maybe, just maybe, the spreadsheet had worked. Maybe seeing the hard numbers had finally forced them into a moment of shocking self-awareness. I should have known better. They weren't silent because they were reflecting. Were silent because they were panicking. The first hint that something was more deeply wrong came not from them, but from a plain automated email from my credit monitoring service. The subject line read, Fraud Alert. A new credit application has been submitted. My heart gave a painful lurch. I opened the email. My hands suddenly cold. The alert was vague. Just a notification that an application for a business loan had been submitted to a lender I'd never heard of, Midwest Commercial Funding. It listed my name and social. Security number? I told myself it had to be a mistake, a clerical error, someone with a similar name. I filed a standard dispute through the portal and tried to put it out of my mind. But 2 days later, the thick envelope arrived. It wasn't a standard business envelope. It was a large, heavy-duty one from the lender's fraud investigation department. My name and address were typed on the label. My hands trembled slightly as I tore it open. Inside was a copy of the full loan application. The document that slid out onto my kitchen counter stole the air from my lungs. It was a loan. For $80,000, the business name listed was Griffin Enterprises, LLC. The primary applicant, the one whose credit and financial history were being used to secure the loan, was me, Silas Miller. My full name, my social security number, my address, even my annual income were all listed with chilling accuracy. At the bottom, in the space for the applicant's signature, was a clumsy, almost childish forgery of my name. It was close enough to pass a quick look, but to me, it was as loud as a siren. My legs felt weak. I had to sit down. I scanned the rest of the document. My parents, Walter and Marion Miller, were listed as co-signers. Their own signatures looking genuine beneath the forgery of mine. And then I saw the date the application was submitted. It was dated 2 days before they sent the group chat message telling me to step away. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening, horrifying snap. The silence, the fragile state of Griffin, the coordinated message to exile me. The thumbs up for my aunt wasn't a spontaneous emotional reaction to our argument. It was a calculated, premeditated plan. It was a heist. Step 1. Apply for a massive loan in the name of the only person in the family with good credit and high income. Forge his signature. Step 2. Create a reason to cut communication with him, to push him away emotionally. Make him the bad guy so he'll retreat in his silence. Step 3. Once the loan is approved and the money is in their account, let him discover the fraud. By then, they'd have the cash and he'd be left. In a legal nightmare, his word against theirs. They probably assumed I'd be too ashamed or too loyal to press charges against my own family. That I'd just absorbed the debt like I'd absorbed everything else. This wasn't just entitlement anymore. This wasn't just mooching or taking advantage. This was a conspiracy to commit fraud. This was criminal. They hadn't just seen me as their ATM. They tried to make me the fall guy for their grandest, most desperate score yet. The feeling in my chest wasn't just anger or betrayal. It was a level of cold fury I had never experienced. The fragile Griffin wasn't just a man-child, he was a con artist. My parents weren't just weak-willed enablers. They were accessories. I sat there in my quiet kitchen, the fraudulent document in my hand, and realized the truth. They didn't want me to step away. They wanted me to disappear, leaving nothing behind but my good name for them to ruin. And I finally understood that I wasn't just fighting for my money. I was fighting for my life. The sight of my forged signature on that loan application, it was like a splash of ice water. The hurt and betrayal that had been clouding my judgment for a week instantly hardened into cold, firm resolve. My professional training took over completely. This was no longer a family dispute. It was a major risk event, a hostile action, and it required a formal, documented response. I didn't call them. I didn't scream or accuse. I acted. I spent the entire weekend in my office, not the one downtown, but the one in my spare bedroom. It became my command center. I treated the situation exactly like I would a major compliance breach at my company. First, I created a new file on my computer, Project Nightingale, named after the old saying about the foolish bird that sang while its nest was being robbed. Inside, I created subfolders: evidence, correspondence, official reports. I scanned the entire loan application packet from the lender. I took high-resolution photos of the forged signature. I saved PDFs of the fraud alert emails. I compiled every text message and email from the past month, highlighting the step-away message in the timeline. I added the ledger spreadsheet as an exhibit, a record of the financial history and motive. I was building a case. On Monday morning, I didn't go to work. I started making calls. First, to the lender, Midwest Commercial Funding. I spoke directly to the head of their fraud department, a no-nonsense woman named M. Davies. I calmly explained the situation, provided my personal details to verify my identity, and emailed her the entire Project Nightingale evidence file. She was silent for a long time after I finished. "Mr. Miller," she said finally, her voice grim, "thank you for being so thorough. We will be launching a full investigation. This is a very serious matter." Second, I filed a formal police report. For identity theft and forgery, I sat in a plain precinct room and walked a tired-looking detective through the entire story. He'd seen it all before. "Family," he sighed, shaking his head as he took my statement. 9 times out of 10, it's family. Third, I contacted the 3 major credit bureaus: Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, and placed an extended fraud alert and a credit freeze on my accounts. I was locking down my financial identity, building a firewall. My last call was the hardest. I had to dig for the number, finding it on an old holiday card from years ago. My Uncle Leland. My dad's younger brother, the one they called unstable and selfish for cutting ties with the family 15 years ago. He picked up on the second ring. "Uncle Leland, it's Silas." There was a pause. "I was wondering when you'd call," he said, his voice raspy but kind. "Let me guess. It stopped being about handouts and started being about them trying to sign your name on the dotted line." I was stunned into silence. How did you know?" He gave a dry chuckle. "Because that's their signature move, kid. With me, they were trying to make me the guarantor on a mortgage for one of your dad's harebrained business schemes after Grandma died." I said no, and suddenly I was the bad guy. "You're not the first person they've tried to drain, Silas. You're just the first one who's smart enough to keep records." Hearing that, hearing the validation from someone who had walked the same path, was like a support beam being slammed into place in my crumbling world. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting.
Wow, this was a
Pattern. A generational sickness. "Good on you for shutting down the bank," Leland said before we hung up. "Some people only learn when the well runs dry." I ended the call feeling a profound sense of resolve. I had identified the risk. I had reported it. I had lessened further damage. My family had tried to frame me in a financial crime, but they had made one critical error. They had done it to a man whose entire job was to expose people who break the rules. After the storm of legal filings and fraud reports, a new kind of quiet settled in. This wasn't the punishing silence of before. This was the quiet of a broken connection. I blocked their numbers, their emails, their social media profiles. I created a digital fortress, and for the first time in years, the buzz of my phone didn't trigger a spike of anxiety. The silence was peace. Of course, they tried to break through the walls. One afternoon, my assistant at work buzzed my office. "Line," her voice flustered. "Silas, there's a woman in the lobby. She says she's your mother. She won't leave." My blood ran cold, but my voice was steady. "Please inform her that this is a private business, and that if she doesn't leave, we will have to call security." I felt a pang of something, not guilt, but a ghost of it, as I said the words, but I knew it was necessary. The office was my sanctuary, a place untouched by their chaos. I wouldn't let them contaminate it. My assistant called back 5 minutes later. She was gone. The experience shook me, and it made me realize I needed more than just legal firewalls. I found a therapist, a smart, no-sense man in his 60s who specialized in family trauma. In his quiet office, I finally unpacked the years of resentment, the misguided sense of duty, and the complex grief of mourning a family that was still alive. "You weren't their son, Silas," he told me in our third session. "You were a function. You were their human error-handling protocol. When you stopped performing your function, the system crashed, and they blamed you for the crash, not for the faulty system itself." It was another moment of profound clarity. I started to reinvest in my own life. I reconnected with my friend Theo, who clapped me on the back and said, "It's about damn time, man. Welcome back." I even called Clara, a woman from the marketing department I'd had a few pleasant conversations with. I'd been meaning to ask her out for months, but had always been too drained, too distracted by the latest family crisis. "I know this is a bit out of the blue," I said on the phone, my heart pounding for a completely different reason than usual, "but I was wondering if you'd like to get dinner sometime. I should warn you, my life has been complicated recently. But it's getting simpler." She laughed. A warm, genuine sound. I like that, Silas. Simple sounds good. Our first date was at a small Italian place. We talked for hours, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I was fully present. My phone stayed in my pocket. No part of my brain was on standby, waiting for the emergency call. When the check came, I felt a simple, profound joy in paying for a meal that was about connection, not obligation. On the way home, I thought about the loan application, the raw, ugly betrayal of it. It was their greatest act of cruelty, but in a way, it had also been their greatest gift. The small, daily erosions of my spirit were things I could ignore or justify. The blatant criminal conspiracy was not. They had pushed me so far that I had no choice but to save myself. They had intended to chain me to an $80,000 debt. Instead, they had handed me the key to my own freedom. A year passed. A year of quiet, steady, deliberate rebuilding. It was the most peaceful year of my life. The fraud investigation concluded, with the loan application being summarily rejected and a formal warning issued to my parents in Griffin. The police report I filed sat in a file somewhere, a dormant threat that ensured they never tried anything again. My credit score, once under threat, was higher than ever. I was thriving. I had been promoted again at work, this time to a vice president role. Clara and I were serious, building something real and healthy based on mutual respect, not codependency. We moved into a new apartment together in a neighborhood I loved, a place filled with light and laughter, a world away from the cramped, dark apartment of my past. The ledger was a file archive deep on a backup drive, a relic of a former life. I thought that part of my life was over, a sealed chapter. Then I ran into my Aunt Janine. It was at a charity gala my company sponsored. I was there with Clara, feeling relaxed and confident in my tuxedo. We were by the bar when I heard a familiar, overly sweet voice call my name. Silas, is that really you? I turned. There she was, my Aunt Janine, draped in pearls and a look of manufactured surprise. She looked me up and down, her eyes taking in my tailored suit, the confident woman by my side. You look wonderful, she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that didn't reach her eyes. Thriving I am, I said simply. Clara, sensing the tension, gave my hand a gentle squeeze. I introduced them, and Janine was sickeningly charming. To her, then she turned her attention back to me, her expression shifting to one of practiced sincerity. You know, Silas, she began, lowering her voice conspiratorially, I know things ended badly, but family is family, and things have been so terribly tough for your parents. Walter's retirement fund took a big hit in the market and your mother's health. Well, she sighed dramatically. I just stared at her, my face a blank mask. I knew the setup. I could see the request coming from a mile away. It was the same. Manipulative script, just with a new set of circumstances. She leaned in closer, her voice a near whisper. We were all just talking. It was a mistake to put so much pressure on you before. But what if we did it right this time? Have you ever thought of creating a new family trust? Something formal, with rules for real emergencies? You're so good at that sort of thing. It would give your parents such peace of mind. I looked at her hopeful, greedy eyes, at her complete and utter inability to understand the magnitude of what they had done. They hadn't learned a thing. They hadn't changed. They had just been waiting for a new opportunity to present itself. And in that moment, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel hurt. I felt nothing but a vast, bottomless pity for her, for them, for their broken, transactional view of the world. A slow, genuine laugh escaped my lips. It wasn't loud or cruel. Just a low chuckle of pure, unadulterated disbelief. Janine looked taken aback. I leaned in, my voice calm and pleasant, as if I were discussing the weather. I have actually, Janine. I've created a new trust. Her eyes lit up. You have? Yes, I said, taking a sip of my drink. It's fully funded, professionally managed, and diversified across multiple asset classes. I review its performance quarterly. I paused, then delivered the final line with a small, polite smile. I call it my life. Access is permanently restricted. I watched the light in her eyes die, the understanding followed by a flash of her old bitterness washing over her face. "Well, I never," she sputtered. "No," I said, straightening my tie. "You never," I took Clara's hand. "It was good to see you." "You, Janine." Without looking back, I walked away, leaving her standing alone at the bar in the wreckage of her final failed attempt. Later that night, Clara and I were on the balcony of our apartment, a bottle of wine opened between us. The glittering expanse of the Chicago skyline spread out like a carpet of fallen stars. The air was cool and clean. It was quiet, the only sounds the distant hum of the city and the soft clink of our glasses. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her head resting on my shoulder. That was intense. I looked out at the city lights, each one a separate story, a separate life. "I am," I said, and the words felt truer than any I had ever spoken. "I'm better than okay. I'm free." For a long time after I cut them off, I expected to feel a void. I thought guilt would be a phantom limb and ache for something. That was no longer there. I braced myself for late-night waves of regret, for the whispers of "but they're your family" that had governed my life for so long, but the void never came. The peace that rushed in to fill the space they occupied was too real, too solid. It was the peace of a phone that never buzzed with dread. It was the peace of looking at my bank account and knowing the money in it was for my future, for our future. It was the peace of making a decision without running it through a mental calculation of how it would affect them, how I could justify it, how I could manage their disappointment. My old life was a higher-risk portfolio with zero returns. I was pouring all my capital, financial, mental, and emotional into a failing entity that offered nothing back but liability. I wasn't just losing money. I was losing years of my life. I was losing my chance at a relationship, at a home, at the simple, quiet joy of a Tuesday night with no impending crisis. I don't know what happened to them. Not really. I hear whispers through the family grapevine that Uncle Leland occasionally passes along. Griffin drifted from one low-paying job to another. My parents had to sell their house and move into a small condo. They'd tell people I had a breakdown, that I became greedy and unstable after my promotion. They rewrote the story to cast themselves as the victims of their cruel, ungrateful son. They had to. To acknowledge the truth would be to acknowledge their own monstrous behavior, and they were too cowardly for that. I don't care. Their story has no power over me anymore. I'm not the villain of their tragedy. I'm just the character who finally walked off the stage and refused to play his part. I took a sip of wine, the taste rich and complex. I looked at Clara, at the life we were building, at the quiet, sturdy reality of it all. I realized that my family had taught me one final, invaluable lesson about risk management. The greatest risk isn't financial loss or a market downturn. The greatest risk is investing your entire sense of self into people who see you as a commodity. My name is Silas Miller. I work in risk and compliance, and I have finally, after 33 years, balanced my own books. My life is no longer a liability. It's my greatest asset, and it is not open for negotiation.